Hey, what's up, everybody, and welcome to QC Live. Excuse me, I had to cough earlier, but welcome to QC Live show where we talk about the Browns after all of what they have done during the weekend and kind of just get into it. So we're just going to jump right into it. Title of this video is The Browns Offense is Alive. And it certainly feels like the Browns offense is alive. And I don't think it's a coincidence that the Browns offense, it feels alive after Jameis Winston takes over starting quarterback responsibilities. Now, another thing that changed was play calling, right? How much was play calling being different a factor in what the Browns offense looked like? And I think it helped. I think Ken Dorsey has a really good grasp of how to call plays for gunslingers, right? Josh Allen was a gunslinger. He called plays well for Josh Allen. And I think he has a good feel for how a gunslinger wants the game to go. Now, can he get a bit pass happy? Absolutely, right? The things where you're going to see his impact in is Kevin Stefanski is pretty strict about being even pass throw, right? He's usually 55-45 pass or maybe 60-40 if they're in a shootout situation. Ken Dorsey called about 41 pass plays against the Baltimore Ravens. That's going to be what Ken Dorsey does. He doesn't not run the ball at all. I thought there was a nice drive there where he kind of really just committed to running the ball exclusively against the Baltimore Ravens, but he's going to be less inclined to run the ball than Kevin Stefanski. I think there was some post-snap stuff, or pre-snap stuff that looked a little bit different, right? The Browns calling out the mic, all of those things. I think that it is something that the Browns want to continue to do. I think they did a really good job with the pre-snap stuff. But overall, this was the same offense that the Cleveland Browns have been running all season. Same play concepts, same formations. This wasn't like Ken Dorsey took over as play caller and started running an entirely different offense or calling from a different part of the play sheet. This was, in large part, the offense that we have seen all season. The only difference is the level of execution from the quarterback position. The offense can look way different when you're just watching the result if the quarterback's actually throwing the ball downfield. Problem with the Browns was that both their quarterbacks that they've played so far, DTR and Deshaun Watson, throw the ball within 10 yards or behind the line of scrimmage over 65% of the time. It's a bad number. Now, let's get into kind of the meat and potatoes of what was proven in that game. And a lot of people, while it was happening, or at least some people while it was happening, really wanted to downplay the impact of how bad Deshaun Watson's play was and how much that was hurting the team. I don't think there was a lot of people who would be willing to admit that like Deshaun Watson was good in 2024 at least. But I do think there were a lot of people who thought that talk about how much Deshaun is affecting the team was a bit overblown, that people were focusing on it too much, that there were other issues to focus on outside of the quarterback position, and that if you change quarterbacks, it wasn't going to completely transform what this team looked like, right? I heard a lot of arguments. It's not just him. Any quarterback would look bad behind this offensive line. I saw the comments, oh, it's not just him. I mean, look how garbage these wide receivers are. It's not just him. There's no run game, right? It's the play caller or it's Ken Dorsey's fault. ironically enough, because Ken Dorsey now gets the play sheet and now people are acting like that's the solution. The reality of what the problem had been for the first 7 games of the season, it smacked everybody in the face. It's simple. A lot of it, not all of it, a lot of it was just Deshaun Watson. It's really that simple. They went from a team that could not beat the New York Giants to a team that beat the Baltimore Ravens, and one position changed. They didn't fire the coach. They didn't scrap the entire offensive philosophy. They lost the wide receiver from the Giants game to now. They lost the wide receiver. And yet they looked exponentially better. What changed? I know sometimes people have this desire for fairness, or they call it fairness, but they just want like everything to be equal in a way that doesn't make sense. Some people wanted me to just criticize the offensive line as if they are equal as percentage of the problem as Watson. And my whole point while he was out there was like, hey, we cannot act like Watson is simply a factor in what's going on with this offense. He's the driving force of why this offense is bad. He plays the quarterback position. We usually understand this concept when the quarterback plays well. But that quarterback starts playing bad, and all of a sudden, it's like the quarterback's not the most important player on the field anymore. That quarterback starts playing bad, all of a sudden, left tackle's just as important as quarterback. The wide receivers is just as important as quarterback. But when the quarterback's playing well, we all understand, hey, that guy can change and transform a mediocre unit into a great one. And that's a two-way street. You could be so bad that you could turn a good unit into a mediocre one. That reality smacked everybody in the face when Jameis Winston got out there and got over 300 yards, almost scored 30 points against the Baltimore Ravens. And you didn't even need the points to confirm it. We knew this was the case in the first half when the Browns had 6 points. The Browns were just moving the ball up and down the field. So much easier. Remember when people were talking about how the wide receivers have low miles per hour and they don't get much separation, and we're talking about these mile per hour numbers and these separation stats? Y'all remember that? We talk about stats like that, but we don't talk about enough how those stats are measured and how flawed it is to talk about those stats without understanding how those stats are measured. Again, we talk a lot about stats when we talk about football these days online, but I don't think we talk enough about understanding what a stat is before we just start spouting it out. We love when something tells us something's in the top 10. We don't be understanding what that stat is, though. We just go, it's top 10. And those two stats, miles per hour and separation, are a peak example of the fact that we don't understand these stats that we be throwing in these articles all the time. Miles per hour, right? It sounds like, okay, that's measuring how fast wide receivers are. But it's really not. What miles per hour measures when they're doing it for next-gen stats is how fast is a wide receiver running when targeted. And that's a key piece to this, because how fast the player runs when they're targeted is greatly determined on where in the field are they targeted. We pointed this out earlier. Deshaun Watson, 65% of his passes between 10 yards and behind the line of scrimmage. You're not going to get the full speed in 10 yards. You're not going to have high miles per hour when you're running those shallow routes. The Browns weren't targeting the parts of the field where you would run the fastest. So you weren't having the fastest miles per hour number. If you understand that stat, you get what that stat is telling you. It's telling you where the Browns are targeting and if you're getting the most, because you should assume that some of these guys run 4.3, right? Elijah Moore runs 4.3. Cedric Tillman runs 4.4. Amari Cooper, I think he's somewhere around 4.6, right? The Browns wide receivers weren't physically slow. We've seen their 40 times. But why was the miles per hour low? We never asked that question. We just saw Browns low miles per hour. Oh, they must be slow. Because we don't understand what that stat is measuring and how that stat is measured. Another example is separation. A lot of people will tell you about separation stats. Do they actually understand how separation is measured? A lot of separation and how separation is measured is about ball placement. If you throw a ball behind a wide receiver and by the time they get their hands on it or their hands in a position to catch, they have to turn back towards the DB, you know what that's going to affect? That's going to affect separation. That's not really a reflection of if the wide receiver is getting open. This all goes back to something that I always say, you can't read football, you gotta watch it. Because if you try to read it and tell me all these separation stats and things like that, you're missing some of the key context. Hey, the separation numbers look like that because the balls weren't on target. Hey, the miles per hour looks like that because these balls are not being thrown downfield at all. You're not giving these guys a chance to run at full speed. A lot of people thought that I was simplifying the Browns' issues by just talking about how the quarterback is affecting them. Was Deshaun Watson the only thing that wasn't going well with the Cleveland Browns in 2024 in the first 7 weeks? No. The offensive line had issues. The wide receivers had issues catching the ball consistently. There were other problems. The defense wasn't playing the most consistent football until the Philadelphia game. There were other problems going on with the Cleveland Browns, but we had to be honest about it. Most of this was being exacerbated by Deshaun Watson. Yeah, is the offensive line great? No. But was the offensive line also having their problems be accelerated by how Deshaun Watson plays in the pocket? Yes. And you know how I could tell this is the case? All it took was Jameis Winston to get in there. 2 sacks. 2 sacks. They gave up 2 sacks. It's not like they had world beater performance. I think as an offensive line pass blocking, they had a 68 grade, which granted is the highest grade that they've had this year, but it's not a high grade in the context of what other teams are scoring on that. It's pretty mid-grade. Wasn't like the offensive line turned into the 2021. It's just they had their job got easier because the quarterback's not putting them in a tougher spot. Deshaun Watson put them in a tougher spot. Our yards per average, a lot of people blame that on Kevin Stefanski and Ken Dorsey. Turns out, if Deshaun doesn't want to throw in the intermediate part of the field, you're going to have a low yards per target because Jameis gets in there, 8.8 yards per target. It's not because those opportunities weren't there in the when Kevin was calling plays. It's just because Jameis is willing to take them. I think a lot of people blamed everything or thought that all of these things were creating why Deshaun Watson was playing poorly. But the reality was Deshaun Watson was playing especially poor. Were other people playing bad? Yeah, but Deshaun was the only one out there being historically awful in 2024. That's just the truth. He was historically awful this year. And now this guy who just played historically awful football is coming off an Achilles injury. This is why people say pretty unanimously, guy's done. Guy is done. But that was something that's interesting. Again, we saw this week, wide receivers open. Talked all that about miles per hour. Hey, Cedric Tillman looked pretty fast on Sunday. Jerry Jeudy looked pretty fast on Sunday. Wide receivers didn't look slow. These wide receivers who people said they were slow. All of a sudden, you throw the ball to them downfield, they're moving. Elijah Moore, man, he looks fast. He's out there whipping guys, looking quick. Huh. It's interesting. I wonder what changed. Some of these wide receivers, we were complaining about the effort they were getting. One of the things I brought up frequently, hey, these guys don't think they're going to get the ball if they run a route past 7 yards. They've been dealing with this since March. So, yeah, the effort didn't look great. Hey, let me ask you guys in chat. Did the effort look significantly better from all of the wide receivers? Did you see Elijah Moore hot dogging it like he was last week? Or were these wide receivers working because they thought they were convinced that the ball would come to them and they would get a chance to make a play? Hell, Jerry Jeudy wanted to make a play so bad he got a PBU on one pass. All of a sudden, now this wide receiver room that couldn't make a play, they're making plays. Wow, it's almost like somebody's giving them an opportunity to make those plays. Talked about the offensive line. Wyatt Teller coming back's a big deal for him. I got to see the film on DeJuan Jones because I'm hearing conflicting things about if DeJuan Jones actually did play well at left tackle. But he wasn't noticeable out there. Jameis did a good job of protecting him. I want to talk about sack numbers for a second here, because we always make this mistake of talking about sack numbers as if they only have to do with the offensive line. But I'm going to tell you right here, and I don't know if I'm the first person to tell you this. I hope I'm not. Sack numbers tend to be more consistent with quarterbacks than offensive lines. Did you know that? Let's take two examples. Baker Mayfield, Deshaun Watson, two quarterbacks the city loves to talk about. Baker Mayfield has been in the top 10 in most sacks taken his entire career. That's been on bad offensive lines like 2018 and 2019. He was in the top 10. On good offensive lines like 2020 and 2021, he still was in the top 10. Medium offensive lines and then back to good offensive lines. He's always been in the top 10 in sacks allowed, with sacks taken. You know who else has been in the top 10? Deshaun Watson, Joe Burrow. It's interesting, right? It's almost like sacks are a reflection of a play style at quarterback, more so than a quarterback's offensive line. Because if Baker Mayfield has played with good offensive lines and bad offensive lines and still have maintained to be in the top 10, I think the only year Baker Mayfield was not in the top 10 was 2020, where the Browns had the best offensive line on earth, and he was still like 16th in the NFL. If you're a quarterback and you have a high propensity to get sacked, you're probably going to have a high propensity to get sacked because it's not really about the offensive line play that gets you sacked. Deshaun Watson, some of his sacks weren't his fault, but a good amount of them, he's rolling out. He's holding the ball longer than he needs to. He's not getting the ball out on time. He takes a sack. Some of the times, he's not seeing what the team's doing. He's not predicting it, so he doesn't see the blitz coming. He just holds the ball, gets hit right into a blitz. Got to understand some of these stats that we be throwing out there. Deshaun Watson, Baker Mayfield, look through their whole career. Pressure to sack numbers are pretty stable. Sack numbers are pretty stable. Is what it is. They just are like that as players. It's their play style that gets them in trouble. Another one, like Joe Flacco played behind a bad offensive line last year. He didn't take a ton of sacks. Why is that? Joe Flacco doesn't play a style that means he takes sacks. Same thing with Jameis Winston. Jameis, especially since he's gotten to New Orleans, has been really good at just climbing the pocket. We saw that today. It was a Sunday. Jameis climbing the pocket. Jameis getting the ball out. And this is another thing that I want to point to. Jameis Winston is really good at not just getting the ball out quickly, but getting the ball out on time. As much as we can complain about Watson holding on to the ball too long, I can show you a quarterback, and you guys are all aware of a quarterback who gets rid of the ball quickly, but not on time. That's DTR. DTR gets rid of the ball too quick, right? Like he'll just throw the ball quick. nothing's developed yet, or safeties hasn't been moved the way they need to be moved, and he kind of blows the play up. You can be too fast as a quarterback. You can be too slow as a quarterback. Being on time is exactly that, being on time. And sometimes being on time means getting rid of the ball quickly. Sometimes being on time means holding on for the ball for an extra quarter second. Jameis has a better knack for that than Deshaun does and than DTR does. Jameis has a better understanding of the flow of a play. It makes sense. He's the most experienced quarterback on the roster. Gets the ball out on time. He understands NFL offenses better, and he understands NFL defenses better. Did you see Jameis not really struggle against the blitz in the way that Deshaun did? Again, it wasn't play calling that made that happen. It wasn't a change in the offense. Jameis was able to identify it. He saw the zero coming. He saw where it was coming from. I think he did a great job on that last drive. It was a 3rd and 8. They pretty much put 9 guys on the line of scrimmage. I've been begging the Browns quarterback to do this all year. 9 guys on the line of scrimmage. Jameis sees it coming. It's 3rd and 9. And he gets to the top step and he throws the out. Bam. Nothing they could do about it. Because he saw it coming. He took advantage of it. And he got the first down. That's any other quarterback. We're complaining about the offensive line stinking. It was never about that. The quarterback has the ability to minimize damage because they're in charge of so much. Because they get to determine so much. Because they have so many options on every play of what they could or could not do. They can make you worse and they can make you better. But we have to remember that that's going to be the quarterback's responsibility. Now, another thing I want to get to, because I'm being really positive about Jameis Winston. I think he deserves it after his performance this week. But I think we all need to understand here with Jameis, it's going to be a ride. It's going to be a roller coaster. And at some point, you're going to be furious at Jameis. This is how it works with Jameis. There are going to be games where Jameis Winston could throw for 400 plus yards. He's done it twice, back to back, I believe, in his career. Jameis could throw for 5 touchdowns in the game. Jameis can do put up crazy numbers. He might also throw for 3 interceptions in a game. I think everybody who loves the Browns, whether you play for them, whether you watch them, should understand that about Jameis. If we understand that about Jameis Winston, we will continue to have a good time. Now, what you don't want to do is fall into the trap of being the 10,000th person that looks at Jameis's skills, sees how smart he can be at times, sees that arm talent, thinks to themselves, I can fix him. Jameis Winston has put in an incredible amount of work to be at the place that he is right now because he's not as turnover prone as he used to be. But keep in mind, look how many times he almost turned that ball over Sunday. This is a man who has shown great improvement. And he still almost turned the ball over 3 times. We just got to understand and accept that, man. Jameis is not going to be your franchise quarterback, but he could be your franchise quarterback, right? We can have fun with Jameis, but he ain't a franchise quarterback. It is what it is. The Browns' focus should still be on the next 2 draft classes at the quarterback position. Jameis is going to be Jameis. That means he's a bridge. That means he's a fun quarterback, but we should always keep that in mind because I don't want people to build this up to a point. And then when Jameis does what Jameis does, which is throw like 1 touchdown, 3 interceptions in a game, we all acted like we got conned. Like we can't do that. We know what Jameis is going to do. And that means he might turn it over. He might ball out. He's one of the few backups in the NFL. And I think probably the only backup in the NFL that's capable of playing at as high as a level as he can, but he's also one of the few backups in the NFL that's capable of just completely blowing the game up, right? Like, that's just how it's going to be with Jameis. And if we accept that, I think we'll be okay during this experience. So I just hope we don't get too carried away with it, right? You know, I already saw somebody comparing to Pat Mahomes. Oh, we don't need to do that. We do not need to do that. But my favorite thing about Jameis is that he gives guys chances to be successful. I was watching a video earlier about like the touchdowns that he had to David Njoku, and I think the guy who was making the video made an excellent point that Jameis does a really good job of giving guys chances to make plays. And David Njoku is one of those players who the Browns have frustratingly enough throughout his whole career, despite him always being 6'4", being a long jump champion and being a giant person, have almost refused to put in 50-50 ball situations. Like, since the day that the Browns drafted David Njoku, Browns fans have salivated at the idea of David Njoku being a 50-50 ball guy. And every single coach that we have had has damn near refused to utilize him in that way. The fun thing about Jameis is it don't matter if the coach intends it or not. David's going to get some 50-50 balls in the red zone. And we saw it this last 2 weeks. He has 2 touchdowns to David Njoku in 2 weeks. 2 touchdowns to David Njoku in 2 weeks. Why? Because he just be throwing that shit up to David. Dave be catching it. That's not complex. That's not play calling. That is just somebody who's willing to take a risk, right? Look at it. Just threw it right at the back of Eddie Jackson. The other game, he just threw it up in the air to David, and David just came down with it. Like, and I think this is good for David. I think this is good for Cedric Tillman. I think this is good for the development of these players to get rewarded for doing these things. It's nice to see David Njoku be utilized like that. And maybe the Browns seeing David Njoku be utilized like that, something clicks and they go, oh, man, whoever the next quarterback is, he should utilize David Njoku like that. Right? Like, oh, David can do these things. He's had practice of doing it. Jameis doing 50-50 balls all 2024. It's nice. And in seeing Cedric Tillman have the game that he has had, after the beginning of the career that he has had a rough start to his career. And I think this game that he had, this breakout game, was huge for Cedric Tillman. And the reason I think it's huge for Cedric Tillman is he is going to, like, there are going to be some lessons that get cemented that he has learned in the last 2 games, but especially in this one. Right now, he has 15 catches on 21 targets, 180 yards, 2 touchdowns. He got both those touchdowns in this last game. He's being rewarded for doing the right thing, right? And that is how players develop. It's one thing to do the right thing, but you have to get the reward, right? If Cedric Tillman out here running crisp on-time routes, but he can't get the ball, he's going to develop habits that are going to try to get him the ball instead of doing what he's supposed to do. That's how he got that interception last week. He was trying to get the ball instead of being where he's supposed to be. Jameis is going to help Cedric Tillman out in his development. And this goes to something that I have a beef with, tanking. I'm not a fan of tanking. I think tanking is one of the worst strategies in all of sports, but especially in football. Maybe there's some sports where it makes sense to tank and it's more beneficial to tank. Probably in a sport like baseball, where for whatever reason, so many of the teams are not willing to spend money. Maybe in a sport like basketball, where you can luck into getting a LeBron James and that being something that can kind of take you out of relative obscurity. But I'm gonna be honest with you. I don't think tanking's a great strategy, even in basketball. Because think about it like this: LeBron has only won multiple championships with one team, the Miami Heat. The one he went to that was already good. And this isn't a statement on LeBron's legacy or anything like that. My whole point is, when you lose on purpose, there are other consequences than just the draft picks you accumulate by trying to lose on purpose. You sacrifice culture when you lose on purpose. You sacrifice on reputation when you lose on purpose. You sacrifice on self-esteem when you lose on purpose. And the reason I'm against tanking is simple. Name me a dynasty in football that was created by losing on purpose. That the foundation of the pieces that got there were from losing on purpose. The two teams in recent memory that tanked the most are the Miami Dolphins and the Cleveland Browns. They're both 2-win football teams right now. Miami Dolphins tanked, then spent $70 million on wide receivers, and they still stink. Browns tanked. Somebody brought up in the chat, suck for luck. And the Colts did suck for luck. And even when the dude that you tank for is as generational as a prospect as Andrew Luck, what did the Indianapolis Colts actually get out of that? Deflategate. Like, even when you tank for Andrew Luck, the best you can get is a ass whooping in the AFC Conference Championship game. That's it. That's it. A loss to Tom Brady. That's it. That's it. The most famous quote of all time is DeQuell Jackson being like, "Oh, this ball is deflated." That's what you got from tanking. That's what you get from tanking. It's a bad strategy. And you know what bugs me about tanking and the people who push for tanking? They act as if this is like a common sense strategy. And it's never worked. It's never worked. Tanking has never worked. No team has ever tanked and gotten desired results. No team has ever done that. But yet we always talk about tanking as this like sure thing. Why not do it? There's so many reasons why not to do it. If you tank, you're not going to develop your players. Cedric Tillman needs to win to cement these kind of lessons that he needs to learn. This is what helps you cement these things. Winning. It feels good to win. People are on their best behavior when they're winning. You know what you do when you're losing? Bullshit. That's when you find out, oh, yeah, he wasn't focused. This man was riding a scooter downtown. Fell off of it. Acting a fool. Yeah, you're not really like focused and locked in when you're losing. And if you get guys, they come into the league in the first 3 years, all they doing is losing, they ain't developing. Kyle Pitts is just now developing in Atlanta. Like just now developing. They drafted Kyle Pitts like 3 years ago. He's in the same draft class as Jamar Chase, and he's finally starting to develop. Because they're finally starting to win on a consistent basis in Atlanta. That's crazy, right? David Njoku's another example of this. Didn't really start developing until 2020. You have to win if you want to develop these players. All tanking does is give teams discounts on talented players. The Browns have tanked and tanked and tanked and tanked. And all we did was create a dynasty in New England. So maybe I am wrong about this. Maybe tanking has created dynasties. It's just not for the team that tanks. All you do is give Kansas City a discount on a talented player when you tank. Like, that's what tanking gets you. It's a horrible strategy. It's only built underperforming teams. But you know what's good for player development? Winning football games. Kansas City gets Pat Mahomes. They develop him. They were trying to win the whole time. They didn't say, hey, we like Pat Mahomes. Let's stink for him. Let's make it lose for Mahomes. Like, it wasn't that. They won as many games as possible, and they got their guy with the resources that they had naturally. You can't manufacture the kind of success that people want to manufacture. You can't boil it down to a mathematical equation. I think analytics has a part in this game, but when we get too deep into it and we act like sports is a simple equation, we end up doing dumb shit. And the peak of dumb shit when it comes to this thought process going too far is tanking. It is the dumbest idea that so many people think is smart to have ever existed. Like, I will say this about tanking. Tanking is the dumbest thing that smart people believe in. There's a lot of smart people think tanking is a good idea still, without any evidence. And usually people are better than to fall into that trap. Somebody brought up Arch Manning, right? And it's like, yeah, the Manning family is notorious for just not letting their offspring get drafted by anybody. They don't want to send Arch Manning to a team that's intentionally trying to be a loser, right? They're going to send Arch Manning to a team that's trying to win. People talk about it with Deion Sanders and Shador. Now, I don't think he's the same quality of prospect as a Manning kid, but even Deion, he's not trying to send his kid to a loser. You out here intentionally trying to lose? That's not game. That's not good for anybody. He's trying to send his kid somewhere where they could develop. He's trying to send them somewhere where they can win. Right? Because winning helps you develop. You don't learn shit when you don't win, in sports at least. All you learn is that you stink when you lose. I'm not saying losing is a zero-sum thing. You can learn some things in loss, but if you aren't getting wins to cement some of these habits, you aren't going to develop players. Like, tanking is such a bad strategy. And that's why I want the Browns to win as much as possible. I know some people are really focused on draft positioning, but I don't care what position you draft the player at. If you draft them in a situation that's not going to be conducive to develop him, then what are you even doing? You could draft a million guys, number 10th overall. If you can't develop them, it doesn't mean a damn thing. Why do the good teams always have the good players? Well, they're winning. We ask the question all the time. The Browns for like 20 years always had the best draft picks, didn't have the best players. Why was that? It's because we're consistently losing. And losing has so many consequences that it cannot be outweighed by simply having a couple of extra draft picks. There's a reason they give the losing teams the draft picks, because it's a consolation prize. It is not the prize. And sometimes we look at the draft like it's the prize itself. It's a consolation because they understand, hey, you probably need some fortune here to be good. And once you're good, if you stay good, you could probably have a better chance of developing players. It's really simple. You know what else is really simple? Some of y'all got to give Kevin Stefanski some credit, man. A lot of people were talking about them Coach of the Year awards is fake. A lot of people talking about Kevin. And look, I was critical of Kevin. I do not like how long it took to get to Jameis Winston, and I hated how we had to get to Jameis Winston. And I will stay on that. Not a big fan of that. But we cannot deny that once we got to Jameis, them results was pretty. Again, the Browns went from one of the team projected to get the 3rd overall pick. They beat one of the best teams in football. That's great coaching. Some people are like, oh, well, he didn't call the plays. He doesn't deserve credit. Well, who made that decision? It was Kevin Stefanski that made the decision to not call the plays. You know what happens? He gets credit for it. Even if you think the only reason the Browns were successful, and I think it's a laughable idea, but even if you think that laughable idea is why Kevin and the offense looked better, well, who made the decision? You get credit for that. If he made the determination that I'm not the best man to call plays in this situation, and that works out, he gets the credit for it. Hey, we got Jameis. We got Ken Dorsey. They both like to throw downfield. I'm a bit more conservative as a play caller. Maybe this is a better fit. That's called doing what's best for the team. We usually revere people who make decisions like that. That's called actual leadership. And think about this week, man. This team had every reason to implode. This team had every reason to melt down. Fans were mad at them. They were 1-6. They're going up against a team that's won 5 in a row. There was a lot of reason to give up in that locker room. And you know what? If this is a Freddie Kitchens coach team, they probably give up. If this is a Hugh Jackson coach team, they probably give up. If this is a, who do you want to say, Mike Pettin coach team, they probably give up. But the one thing I give not Ken Dorsey, but Ken Dorsey does deserve some credit. But one thing I give Kevin Stefanski credit for, he's found a way to find guys and get guys motivated in tough spots. Last year, great example of that. The first coach of the year, a great example of that. This game right here, another great example of that. I know we got guys who will never, ever support Kevin Stefanski for whatever reason. And always look for the bad in him. And always look for a reason to blame Kevin Stefanski for a problem. But we got to keep it 100 here. We got to keep it a buck. Kevin's a good coach. If we were looking at this and this wasn't the Browns, this was Pittsburgh that did it, and Mike Tomlin, Browns fans would pretty universally recognize, hey, Mike Tomlin did a hell of a job getting those guys ready. That's why Mike Tomlin is one of the best head coaches in the NFL. It's because he can get his guys ready, even in despair. He can keep his locker room together. I would argue Kevin does a better job at that than Mike Tomlin does. Kevin deserves that same respect. Hell, I think Kevin's significantly less stubborn than Mike Tomlin is. Because Mike Tomlin, situation like that, he probably ain't giving up the book if he was an offensive coordinator. Kevin gave up the book. Trusted his guys. This is a staple with Kevin Stefanski, and I think why his teams fight so hard for him. Kevin Stefanski and Andrew Berry, for better or worse, are going to trust their guys. The good of this is you get something like Sunday, where Jameis almost throws an interception, but gets the opportunity to throw that deep over to win the game. That is the good of it. The bad of I'm going to trust my guys. It's like, hey, Deshaun Watson's playing historically awful football. I'm going to keep him on the field. But in all, as long as you do your job in bringing in the right players, having a coach out there who has, as Jameis Winston said, unwavering faith in his guys is a good thing. So many people want to make this about the Haslams, like that Jimmy Haslam. Like I want people to understand how ridiculous they sound when they say this. You're telling me right now you think Jimmy Haslam is tapped in enough and locked in on this football team so much that he's like, Kevin, you got to give up the play calling. Do you think that's what Jimmy Haslam's doing on his free time? You think Jimmy Haslam's out here trying to fit the sideline operation of the Cleveland Browns? We call Jimmy Haslam all types of incompetent, but we think Jimmy Haslam out here doing that? That's crazy. He's not doing that. Jimmy Haslam is not trying to change the play caller. That's not what Jimmy Haslam is out here doing. And for all this talk about Jimmy Haslam's meddling, he's meddling, all this stuff, all these people crying, Jimmy Haslam meddling. And look, I said this when it did not benefit Kevin, and when it does benefit Kevin, I have maintained that this whole Jimmy Haslam and meddling thing is bullshit. We don't even see Jimmy in the building anymore. We don't even see Jimmy at the games. You think if he was out there trying to be Jerry Jones, he would be as visible as Jerry Jones? He ain't there. He's not making these decisions. He trusts Andrew Berry and Kevin Stefanski to run the football operations. That's why those are the main two people you see at the games. Jimmy Haslam is not making these decisions. He's not Jerry. Again, think about it. Jerry Jones, you know that Jerry Jones meddles because Jerry Jones lets you know that he meddles, and Jerry Jones is always there. Jerry Jones be taking press conferences. When the last time we done talked to Jimmy Haslam? Like, Jimmy has resigned to just trust his guys. And I love how people be like, well, you don't know, Quincy. I know a hell of a lot more than you. Like, when it comes to this, yes, I would have a better instance on what's going on here, a better read. I'm telling you right now, it's a myth that Jimmy's out here changing the play caller. Like, come on now. Like, does Jimmy Haslam get involved with big decisions like giving Deshaun Watson a $230 million guaranteed contract? Yeah. Does Jimmy Haslam like tell you have to trade for Deshaun? No, that's not what Jimmy does. When I gave Stefanski a lot of flack for continuing to go with Deshaun Watson because he was the one making the decision to continue to go with Deshaun Watson, not Jimmy Haslam. And I give Jimmy credit for giving Ken Dorsey the play call sheet because he's the one that went for it. And somebody else has pointed out, well, Quincy, you thought Deshaun Watson wasn't that bad a few months ago. Yeah, then he started playing football in 2024. Can you put that comment on screen? I want to make a point of him. Ian, if you could do me that favor. We'll give him his 15 minutes of attention or whatever it is. We can put him on screen for a second here. And somebody's like, yeah, but this user says, somebody thought Deshaun was good. Yeah. It's almost as if you could react to how he plays in real time, right? It's almost as if you could react to the things that you see and don't see. Am I supposed to sit here and be like, oh, I thought Deshaun Watson would have been fine after he played well in 2023 and then he doesn't play well in 2024? I'm like, no, but he played well in 20. No, I got to react to what's going on in front of me. That is how this whole thing works. Saying, oh, well, I thought Watson, and look, he exaggerates because I didn't love Watson. I thought Watson was above average in 2023 because he was above average in 2023. But 2024, he was clearly bad. Regress from there. You know, my opinion didn't change about Deshaun Watson. My opinion just evolved with what Deshaun Watson was doing at the time. That's how opinions work. You kind of just react to what goes on. And you're like, oh, well, that changes things. But nonetheless, I think Kevin deserves a ton and I mean a ton of credit, for being willing to step down as the play caller and letting Ken Dorsey step up in that situation. I think Ken Dorsey, look, not a lot of people would have called a deep ball or another pass after Jameis almost threw that interception in a situation where you only needed a field goal. But Ken Dorsey had the balls to do it. That's the difference. Like, I don't think Kevin calls that play. And I don't think if that play doesn't get called, I don't think the Browns win that game. I think it took a real understanding of the mentality of Jameis Winston as a gunslinger to call another deep shot after that. And Ken Dorsey deserves a ton of credit for having the stones to do it. And Kevin gets a lot of credit for understanding the situation he's in and making the right call for the right moment. That's a great head coach there. Let's take some questions before we head out. If only Watson didn't get the yips, was it lack of game prep? I just think it was natural decline here for Deshaun Watson, to be honest with you. The throwing shoulder surgery, I thought it wasn't going to be that big of a deal during the offseason. It clearly was a bigger deal than I thought and they put on, because he could not drive the ball as well. And I think some of the stuff is just age and rust, and you can't relearn these things. We thought it was like a bicycle. He was going to get back on and be fine, but it just wasn't that simple. He had lost a lot from not playing in 2 years. He had lost a lot from being injured so much over the 2 years that he'd been playing. And he lost a lot physically from all those injuries and just straight up aging. Some guys age way faster than others, and Watson might be one of those guys who hits 30 a lot quicker. I think that's a big part of it. I think he prepared the same. I think he tried. I think he worked hard. The one thing with Watson, I don't think Watson just sat on his back and didn't care. Deshaun Watson is well aware that his reputation is as garbage as his reputation is. And he knew that the only way to repair that reputation was to play good football. He had all the motivation in the world to play good football. I don't think this is because he got the contract. He had no motivation to be good. He had every bit of motivation because he hates how he's viewed right now. But that wasn't enough because nature just took over. I think he worked hard. I just think he just wasn't good anymore, to be honest with you. Hit the next one. During Stefanski's press conference, someone asked him about Barry's scouting process this time of the year, but he said he avoids Barry in the building. Is there something to that? I would have to hear how he said it. Sometimes Kevin, he has a pretty dry sense of humor, and he's just making a joke about him. I imagine those two have a good time, and there's a bunch of different jokes coaches make about trying to avoid the GM for whatever reason. So it could have been a joke. I have not seen the clip yet, so I would want to see the clip before I comment too harshly either way on any of that, to be honest with you. But yeah, I think those two have worked well together. Their track record seems to work well together. How highly Andrew Barry speaks of Kevin Stefanski works well together. They're going to have arguments. That happens all the time with GMs and head coaches, because head coaches want to keep as many players on the field as possible, and GMs naturally have to say no. So I think it makes some sense that there would be a situation where, they would disagree on stuff. That's natural. Draft running back, QB, defensive end, or O-line in round 1. So this is a good question, Kia. But I think a question like this is one that's almost impossible to answer, one, at this point in the season, and two, really before your team is on the clock. Because would I draft the running back? I would if the right one was available at the right pick. Would I draft the quarterback? Maybe. The right one's available at the right spot. A defensive end? Maybe. Offensive lineman, it matters who else is on the board. It matters where I'm picking in the draft, and it matters who's left at the spot that I'm picking and who's available at other positions. Because if I love this running back, but I also love 4 other running backs that are available, and I know I have a second round pick, I might not be too pressed to get Ashawn Gentry. But if I only love one quarterback or one defensive lineman or one offensive tackle or a guard in this draft class, and they're available, and I know there's not going to be another guard I like for the rest of this draft class, I might take that position. So that's the context that I really need there to be able to answer that question in any kind of a meaningful way. But it is something to think about, like what kind of positions is this draft class really good at, and where the Browns should focus their scouting for the 2025 draft. My bad. Another one. Rob here says, Q, do you think the Browns should trade Za'Darius? May need an extra pick to get players on a rookie deal to deal with the Watson contract next year. They'll figure out the Watson contract. I don't think they're going to make decisions based on what this Watson contract is or is not going to look like. He's going to be injured. Who knows when he's coming back from that Achilles? He could come back as soon as week 1 next year. Other quarterbacks have, but there's a chance that this takes longer than normal because this isn't a normal situation for a football player. So, yeah, he could get extra picks here, but I think to trade Za'Darius Smith, it's going to be similar to Amari Cooper. Somebody's going to have to offer above what the asking price was. The asking price for Cooper was a 4th-round pick. They got a 3rd-round pick from the Buffalo Bills. So they took that. With Za'Darius, I don't know what the asking price is, but they'll take it. They'll take it if somebody offers more than it. But I don't think they're going to be in a rush to trade everybody like some people are assuming. Last question of the day here is from Buckeye Steve. Yesterday on your channel, you were talking about the idea of a Stefanski QB. Do you think this comes down more to play style or more to quarterback attitude, star mentality versus listen to the coach? No, I think you could be a star quarterback and still be a quarterback who collaborates well with your coaches. I think most star quarterbacks are that, right? Pat Mahomes works really well with Andy Reid. And Tom Brady works really well with his offensive coaches when he was in the league. So I don't think those two things are unique. What I mean when I'm talking about Stefanski has to figure out what it is that he wants and how to identify that in the new era is he likes guys who can climb in the pocket, who can stay in the pocket, and who like to stay in the pocket. College football is not developing that guy right now. Like, go watch a college football game and tell me how many times you see a top quarterback in the SEC or the Big Ten stay in the pocket all the time. I can think maybe Curtis Work. Like, he doesn't roll out a ton, but a lot of these guys are used to being the best athletes on the field. And now that we want quarterbacks to have more of an athletic edge to them, they're going to be more used to rolling out, right? So I think there is somebody like the Browns want a quarterback who can understand the flow and the rhythm of the game and be able to work from within the pocket. And that's not necessarily getting developed right now. So how do you identify that when a lot of these guys are in spread? And I think that's the thing. Like, they need to really focus in on, like, okay, how do we identify these traits? What traits are we looking for? Because I think what got them to Deshaun Watson was a failed process. You can make the argument for DTR. Was a failed process that got him there, right? So they need to figure out, okay, maybe we were wrong with some of the identifiers we saw in Watson or even Baker Mayfield to think that they could be able to do this. So let's look at some other identifiers in this. How good are their feet? How smooth are they as athletes? How comfortable are they with throw while being contacted, right? Like, maybe that can determine it. But it's a projection, a massive projection they have to make to fit a quarterback in this offense. And they haven't been great at projecting if these guys could fit unless these guys are over 30, right? The over 30s quarterbacks that you've seen do it, yeah, they can project that because they've seen it. But the question is, for these prospects, like, you're not going to see Jalen Milroe do play action boot and work within the pocket. That doesn't mean he can't do it, but it does mean that you have to figure out how you can project if he could do it. Same thing with Shador. I don't know if he could do it. All I see him do in college is roll out, but maybe he's capable of staying in the pocket and climbing and doing all that. He's going to have to become capable of doing that because he's not a good enough athlete to get away with it in the NFL level. Or like Cam Ward would probably be the guy who's probably the least capable of this, but you don't know. Maybe he can be. We thought the same thing about Josh Allen. He was pretty capable of doing that. So that's what I mean when I'm saying, hey, you got to figure out how comfortable a quarterback is in structure and how to identify that with these players because the Browns have made some mistakes here in the Stefanski era, assuming that some quarterbacks will be comfortable in structure, and they're not. That's my final say for today. Appreciate you guys having me for this hour of Browns talk. Now it's time to hand the keys over for the night to Fred and to Barry. So, peace. Y'all have a good one.